Sorry about the sound effects. Good afternoon. I think we're just about 1 o'clock. A very warm welcome to St. Peter Mancroft, whether you're here in church or tuning in online. There's the 1 o'clock. If you are visiting the church, then please feel free to continue with your visit, looking around and enjoying the fine building. I'm Catherine Waddams, a lay minister here, and during Lent we're combining, as many of you know, these weekly reflections with our joint course with St. Stephen's Church. So a special welcome to those of you who are in church for that. In a few minutes we'll go down to the octagon and continue with our study of sanctuary, today focusing on freedom. And as part of that study, we'll read a story about freedom from slavery in 19th century US. I want to explore the implications of that historical chattel slavery for us here in St. Peter Mancroft and in the church more widely today in this reflection. You may have seen in the news the Church of England's plans to address the legacy of slavery. It's been in the news this week, and the church commissioners have accepted that we need more than 10 times the original amount of £100 million to address that legacy. But this isn't seen as reparation. Indeed, how can you measure the damage done by these horrific practices? Kidnapping people from their homes, exporting them in horrendous conditions to belong to other people. There's a danger with reparations that sounds as if we can somehow compensate for taking away people's freedom in this way, as well as the disadvantage that this legacy has left for subsequent generations. Even if this is what we are trying to do, how do we measure its extent? For example, what about my British friend, son of a Zimbabwean student in England, not a descendant of slaves? My friend has certainly suffered from consistent racism, telling us in a matter-of-fact way how, as a young boy in South London, he always wondered what abuse he might experience whenever he left the house and how best to avoid it. I found this particularly striking to hear compared with my own carefree memories of using the local London square just a few miles away from where he grew up as my playground, where my main worry was the very noisy Pekingese dog down the road. Thankfully, he was safely behind a gate. So we need to repent not just of slavery, but of the whole domination of white societies, which kept Zimbabwe and my friend's father poor and subservient. And of course, the church was heavily implicit in this process, as well as a beneficiary from slavery. I always like that remark of Jomo Kenyatta, the first president of Kenya. When the missionaries arrived, he said, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible. They taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible. It's difficult to see how you can possibly find a monetary value that will compensate for the inequity and the disadvantage that whole system of colonialism and slavery have imposed. This is not to deny that some black people benefited from the slave trade, but the legacy is one of deep disadvantage at so many levels, at a personal level, a society level, a national and an international level. Another approach is to focus not on the damage to one side, but the enrichment to the other. The very analytical Church of England report focuses on how much the church benefited, in particular through one fund known as Queen Anne's Bounty. It's full of numbers. Beyond the church, how much did we as a society, or perhaps as individual families, benefit from chattel enslavement? I could argue there wasn't much benefit to my family. We certainly didn't own slaves or have anything to invest in anything, let alone slavery. My great-grandfather was a Lincolnshire farm labourer, classified in the census as a pauper, suffering from his own oppression and low status in society. But though his choices were limited by low social status and lack of money, he had a lot more freedom than an enslaved person and the benefit of security in his own community. And he and his family had opportunities. 2 of his 16 surviving children became priests, which was then a very respectable occupation. Thomas emigrated to Australia and sent enough money back home for his youngest brother, my grandfather Fred, to go to Cambridge and be ordained. And to the extent that the British economy as a whole benefited from slavery, Fred and his family did so too. As do I, a privileged member of a privileged society, which owes some of that privilege to the past exploitation of other people. Again, this does seem an impossible benefit to quantify. The Church Commissioner's report published last year, and which was accepted in full this week by the Church of England Commissioners, reflects these enormities. And of course, the Church, our Church of England, did benefit enormously and directly from the slave trade through its investments. Comments this week included one from Kehinde Andrews, Professor of Black Studies at Birmingham City University. It is impossible to quantify the lasting impact of slavery or just how much the Church had benefited from it. And he added, before science, it was the Church's theology which justified the whole endeavour. And how do you put a price on that? Bishop Rosemary Mallett reminded us that the impacts of slavery are still felt in communities today, and that, quote, we brought in a system of racism where people are judged on the basis of their colour. She added, we can't change the past, but we can work for a better present, and we can build a legacy for the future. Our own attitudes, our willingness to hear other people's experiences, are a key part of the community which we are part of, building that better future. As Christians, we believe that all people are created in God's image. But how does that translate to the way we treat people who look and behave differently, come from a different culture perhaps? Might it affect our approach to immigration policy if we recognize the damage our country has inflicted on others in the past? And unfortunately, exploitation is not only historical, but still very much present today. In an extreme form, our society still suffers from modern slavery, which the Home Office describes as a serious and brutal crime in which people are treated as commodities and exploited for criminal gain. The true extent of modern slavery in the UK, and indeed globally, is unknown. One international charity, appropriately named Walk Free, wonderful title, estimates there are 50 million modern slaves throughout the world. And there are some shocking local headlines. The latest figures show 269 victims of modern slavery identified in Norfolk in the 12 months to June last year. Most commonly, this was labour exploitation, and 96% of the victims identified were men. We know that modern slavery exists in hand car washes and in the agricultural sector. Another statistic, half of the victims of enforced criminality in Norfolk, for example, drug selling, were young people, and their most common nationality is British. You may have heard a few years ago about the discovery that a pub on the Earlham Road had almost certainly been used as a cover for a brothel, which imprisoned the women workers. That's round the corner from my house. I walked past it every day. I worshipped in the church next door, completely oblivious to what was going on inside. There is so much that we do not see. What then can we do about such slavery? On a global level, we can find out where our clothes and other products come from and try to avoid buying products which are made by exploiting workers, though this presents its own challenges and moral questions. Closer to home, we can be more aware, learn about it, know the signs, and try to spot people who may be being exploited. We can join current campaigns, such as the Coalition to Stop Slavery. And if we need inspiration, there are local heroes from the past. Norwich can be proud of its association, both with efforts to end the slave trade through William Wilberforce and to abolish slavery itself some years later in the British Empire, led by Thomas Fowell Buxton. He married a sister of Elizabeth Fry and had other close links with the Gurney family, who lived in Earlham Hall. He's commemorated both in the cathedral and in a plaque outside the Friends Meeting House here in Norwich. I noticed it as I cycled past on the way here. Thomas's sister-in-law, Anna Gurney, founded the Ladies' Anti-Slavery Society in Norwich with Amelia Opie, inspired by their Quaker faith. And what about milder levels of economic exploitation? In a moment, we will be discussing sanctuary as a place of freedom. Freedom can be seen as the ability to say no. How can that best be nurtured and protected? Well, I'm afraid that my reflection ends with a lot of questions, and there will be more to discuss when we go downstairs to the octagon to talk about the readings that we are considering this week. So you're all very welcome to join us down in the octagon and for a hot drink first, and get there either by going down the steps here, or if you need level access, by going out of the south door and round and past all the hoardings and so on and into the octagon that way. So I look forward very much to seeing you there. Thank you for listening.